This Explain Everything presentation is about LBJ to kind of wrap up some of the aspects we've not had a chance to discuss in class. So we really want to focus on the domestic policy side other than civil rights, which of course we've covered in other ways. Now, certainly things on the domestic side are influenced by the foreign policy and vice versa. So LBJ is a New Deal Democrat in many ways, wants to expand upon that in the Great Society, which and the success for that would depend upon a growing, vibrant economy. And he realized the war in Vietnam could wreck his plans for the Great Society. Can he sustain a budget that pays for both guns and butter, as they say? So on this slide, we see some of aspects on the sides of various events in the Johnson administration and some of his accomplishments. And it appears center screen that LBJ was perhaps not having the best of days. LBJ was very much a power broker when it came to the presidency and vice presidency. A Texan, of course, fairly humble roots, gone to a normal college, teacher college in Texas. He was very smart and politically astute, insecure as a Southerner in some ways, and had an outsized ego. But as Senate Majority Leader, he ran the Senate as if it was his personal club with fellow Texan Sam Rayburn, who was Speaker of the House. They knew how to get legislation passed and pass things in Congress. He did have a fairly smooth transition immediately after JFK and pushed JFK's legislation through in ways that LBJ did not exert his full influence while vice president. So a number of ideas of JFK's new frontier really get accomplished more in LBJ's term and with the Great Society. So in his first year as president, filling out JFK's term, LBJ was very popular. Then his popularity declined. He thought the media was hostile to him, tried to control access to the media. He also experienced hostility from the Kennedy family. Relations between LBJ and JFK were in some ways never great. And there's some justification to LBJ feeling like he should have felt a little more love from the Kennedy clan as he accomplished many of Kennedy's goals. Here we see some pictures of just what was known as the Johnson style or LBJ style. He had a physical presence and could be physically intimidating as he lobbied people, and here we see getting right up in their faces, and so very much a power broker, and someone would use all of the tools at his disposal to lobby Congress to get people to do what he wanted, and getting in their face with LBJ was literal as well as metaphorical. While LBJ worked very well with Congress, like clubbed him as good at getting legislation passed as FDR, maybe better, LBJ was very stylistically different from JFK. He did not have that patrician elegance. So here we see a picture of him showing off his scar to the media after I had gallbladder surgery. Can't imagine a lot of presidents doing that. LBJ had beagles, was known for swinging them by their ears. We see a picture of that. We can imagine what animal rights groups would do to him today were that shown. So he has some rough edges, but he was very politically successful. Key in LBJ's domestic program was his Great Society and his war on poverty. Here we see a quote from Michael Harrington, author of Culture of Poverty, but as a better-known book, The Other America, Poverty in the United States. And The Other America sometimes appears on the AP exam, and you probably want to be familiar with it. But it was a sociological and economic study of persistent poverty in the United States. Originally published in 1962, revealing a depth of a poverty and analyzing why these invisible poor citizens, elderly children, minorities were not given adequate opportunity. So it helps to draw attention to this issue of persistent poverty in the midst of a land of plenty, as America economically was doing pretty well. So Michael Harrington, An Author You Should Know, Culture of Poverty, or also The Other America. Economically, under LBJ, there was the Tax Act of 1964, this JFK's plan into effect, a tax reduction and increased federal spending, so more money in people's pockets and in government programs. The idea being that the tax cut will stimulate economic growth, then economic growth having a smaller percentage of a larger pie is still more absolute pie. So there is some good economic news as GNP, gross national product, increased 24% from 1960 to 64, 57% increase in corporate profits. 1965 unemployment was 3.9%, pretty good rate, but LBJ wanted to try to eliminate it altogether. Calls for this Unconditional War on Poverty and Economic Opportunity Act of 1964 included a variety of programs. Head Start, so early education opportunities, Job Corps for job training, work study for university students to work and get paid and help pay for college. VISTA, volunteers in service to America, kind of like a domestic Peace Corps, neighborhood youth corps, CAPS, community action programs with input from the poor, and to act in specific areas to increase economic opportunity. We also have the passage of Medicare and Medicaid signed in Harry Truman's hometown. So it's movement on health insurance that had been a goal of progressives and Democrats for quite some time. Highway safety, some action on environmental ideas and consumer protection. So we really see with the creation of Medicare and Medicaid, aid to dependent children, the modern structure of the welfare state under LBJ's Great Society, even more so than from the New Deal, though as it would be hard to imagine the Great Society being possible without the New Deal coming before it. And of course, LBJ was a New Deal supporter. The 64 election, then, which we've talked some about in class, offered a very clear choice between Barry Goldwater, Arizona senator, who classic libertarian conservative. So this election offered the clearest choice probably since 32. Goldwater wants to abolish the progressive tax system, make Social Security voluntary, shrink the federal government, do away with union laws, very much states' rights. Now, the unfortunate part of that is that meant that states' rights played out against the backdrop of the civil rights movement, and while Goldwater likely is looking at 10th Amendment on a broader range of issues, comes out not to enforce civil rights laws on that basis. He talks about that nuclear weapons ought to be at least on the table in regard to Vietnam, resulting in the famous Daisy commercial. Goldwater's slogan, "In your heart you know he's right," upon a play on words from right as in correct and right conservative. Democrats played on that, "In your heart you know he might," as in might start World War III. LBJ then announced this Great Society for the campaign with legislative goals: 3, abundance and liberty for all, an end to poverty, an end to racial injustice. Of course, the famous Daisy ad that we've looked at in class, and just some of the campaign buttons. Here we see the electoral map, quite a victory for LBJ. So clear choice. Republicans nominated this more conservative candidate, and while he got walloped, many think this set up a shift in the Republican Party that would be set for later conservative dominance through the end of the 20th century. We do see Goldwater then breaking into the Solid South, no doubt as a result of LBJ's pro-civil rights legislations. But LBJ, landslide victory, 61.3% popular vote, all but Arizona and 5 Deep South states, 486 to 52 in the Electoral College, and swept in lots of liberal members of Congress in the 89th Congress. So then we have these programs, Medicare under the Social Security Administration, health insurance signed in Independence, Missouri as a tip of the hat to Harry Truman. Education Act, largest in history up to that time by the federal government, $1 billion in grants to public secondary and elementary schools in low-income areas. Higher Education Act, assistance to college students, 2 new cabinet-level departments, transportation, working in highway beautification and other things. HUD, that's housing and urban development, so low-cost housing in cities. Motor Vehicle Safety Act with consumer protection, in part helped along by one of Ralph Nader's books, Unsafe at Any Speed on the Corvair, working to eliminate poverty. Arguing that in spite of high employment, 20 to 25% of people had substandard diet. Then, as we said before, Job Corps, Vista, Head Start, the Office of Economic Opportunity, and Clean Water and Air Acts and Wilderness Preservation. So movement on quite a lot of fronts. So accomplishments and controversy both came from the Great Society. It achieved some of the goals of the Fair Deal and the New Frontier. It gave money to people who could not help themselves, but much of the money went to pay staff and to cover bureaucratic costs. And it has this flawed assumption that poverty could be ended, not ameliorated, not temporarily helped out, but ended by government action, where programs focused on people who could be employed with little attention to the permanently poor, mothers with children, assuming that, well, if we give them money, they won't be poor anymore. We're technically correct, but you'll have to do that on an ongoing basis. It did not necessarily address underlying causes. Also tended to raise some unrealistic expectations as to what could and could not be accomplished, and resented by the middle class, both in terms of having to pick up the bill in taxes for some of this, and simply in a view, accurate or not, that people are getting handouts off of their nickel. It greatly expanded the federal bureaucracy in D.C. So while the New Deal may have expanded it, saw nothing like what happened under Great Society, and people wondered, as Eisenhower had talked about a military-industrial complex, if the Great Society was creating a poverty-industrial complex with the middle-class bureaucracy benefiting more than the poor. If not for Vietnam, may have been able to carry forth more of his goals and agenda, and of course as a result ended up not running in '68.